Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast. It's brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. Charlie, how you doing?
What is going on? Good to be back together, although this is going to be a hard episode to follow after the last exclusive interview that we got with none other than number 88.
Yeah, a little 𝗍𝗗𝗄𝗯 last week in Chicago with the podcast ahead of his 8-8 day. I know you were at Johnny's in the morning for the media availability and saw the clinic and saw his son Trick mix it up with 𝗦𝗏cie 𝗏𝗏 like father, like son.
Man, that was so fun to watch. And it kind of brought me back to the memories because when I got there to Johnny's, Kane was there training with 𝗦𝗏cie 𝗏𝗏. They were doing their NHL workout before Kane then went into the locker room and changed into his tracksuit to skate with the youth hockey players. And sure enough, Kane and 𝗏𝗏 finished each practice with a game of 2-puck, and Kane looked like he was in mid-season form.
All right, so a little bit more on that. Because it was going to be such a long day, the clinic was going to start at 9 o'clock with the kids, and then he had an autograph session at Water Tower at 11:30, and then that went right into the night's festivities. It began at 5:30 and went till 9 or so. So he wasn't going to work out with 𝗏𝗏 on the ice, but the day prior, Kane beat him in 2-puck. So Alex, the uber competitor that he is like, no. We're going to get on the ice and play and work out before you do the kids' clinic. And of course, Patrick got the best of him. But some things don't change. You know, you might be turning 37 in Patrick Kane's this upcoming season. You may have a full day ahead of you. But when your buddy challenges you and presses you in the chest and says, no, we're doing it, yeah, he's going to answer the bell.
Man, those competitive juices between those two are pretty evident. I also heard Brian Kane, who helps train the two of them, he also snuck in a win against 𝗏𝗏 and Patrick. So add a win for Brian Kane, one of the Blackhawks skills coaches.
Okay, so on this podcast, we're just about a month or so away from training camp. We're going to recap 8-8 day and that Patrick Kane podcast from last week. A lot of different topics that came up, a lot of Chicago-centric, Blackhawks-centric topics that came up that we'll dive into. And then it's our way too early prediction for the lineup for the opening night that will take place actually in the afternoon, Chicago time, in Sunrise, Florida, against the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. All right, let's begin with kind of a recap on the podcast from Patrick Kane, and we delve into a bunch of different topics. Let's try to stick to some of the Blackhawks related stuff, and I'll begin with Jeff Blashill. He coached Patrick a couple of times in the Worlds, and Patrick talked about how he holds players accountable, and I thought it was cool the story he told, how he went after Patrick in an early video session. And he equated that to Belichick going after Brady. And when you go after the best player in the room, everybody takes notice. And so he holds players accountable. That stuck with Patrick. I thought the fact that, he talked about what a smart hockey mind Blashill is, and the fact that, Patrick would pick his brain when he was at the Blackhawks and he would see him in Detroit, or the last few years when he was an assistant in Tampa, how they would talk. And to me, Kane doesn't check boxes. If he finds it worthy of his time to have a conversation about the thing that he's most passionate about, that being the game of hockey, that holds weight with me. So I thought he had some interesting comments on Blashill, basically saying he's the perfect fit for where this franchise is at in the rebuild.
Yeah, I loved that he shared that story because it provided a little bit of a glimpse into Blashill's coaching style and not being afraid to call out the star players. Because it almost, when you do that right out of the gate, it almost sets the tone inside the locker room like, hey, no one is immune to criticism. And so for him to go at Kane right away at one of those world's, coaching meetings, that the film rooms, I thought that was awesome. And Kane himself has been on record saying that he likes that kind of tug and pull, because I remember when, I think actually you had brought it up on the podcast when him and DeBrincat went at it in that Ottawa game. And he was like, no, I actually like when guys want to challenge me because I want that competitive. Like he doesn't want young players to see Kane as this, as this hockey god and just unchallengeable. Like he wants people to challenge him because he feels like that grows. And so I think that was him sharing that story about Blashill and then making that comparison, the Belichick to Brady, I thought was awesome because Blashill is absolutely going to carry that mentality into Chicago. And I think that's why Blashill has gotten head coaching gigs at seemingly every level, whether it's, minors, college, junior, like all the internationally, NHL. And so I think Blashill has that leadership style, just the voice command, but I also think he has the credibility to hold players accountable and even the star players.
I'll take it one step further and talk about Connor Bedard and how that relates to him. We talk about great players want to be coached. There was that stretch on national TV where Mark Messier and Bissonnette on separate national broadcasts, it took Bedard to task for the way he was playing, calling it pond hockey and, questioning work ethic and how he was going about playing the game in a two-way style or maximum effort, or what he was doing, holding on the puck too long. And if you remember, we told the story on this podcast. Darren Payne went to Bedard, and I was with Darren, and he was asking him about that. And and Bedard gave an unbelievable response. He said, I really love when analysts break down hockey plays, because my favorite thing about ESPN is watching Monday after an NFL Sunday and listening to all the analysts break down the different plays, what went right, what went wrong, what they think went right and wrong from the knowledge that they have, not knowing plays and exactly what everybody wants to do out there. And he said, I had no problem with that. My biggest issue was taking shots at my coach. And so when you talk about, Kane liking to be challenged by DeBrincat, and that was a theme that came up, Charlie, over the week in my conversation with him in the podcast, and then the conversation I had with him at the event. Collectively, they challenged each other on a daily basis. Kane would challenge Toews. Toews would challenge Kane. Sharp was in that conversation. Seabrook, Keith, 𝗭𝟐, on and on and on. And it took and he used Panarin as an example, that it takes some time to understand that that's business. When I come at you on the bench during a game after a shift and I wanted the puck and I voice my concerns, that's us doing business. That's done when the game is over. And Panarin would not sleep the night and think that they're in a fight and want to mix it up. And Patrick would be like, "What's up, Red Man?" And he would realize that he'd have to move on from it. So the challenging of one another, it was a staple of the Cup years. And I think it's a staple of good teams, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the internal competition that those Blackhawks teams that won 3 Stanley Cups in 6 years created within themselves manifested and carried over into the games when they were actually playing opponents, because there was that internal competition. If 𝗭𝗏 scored a goal, Kane would want to try to match it, right? Or if they were going down to the final stretch of the regular season and Sharp was at 32 goals and Kane's at 31 and they're trying to see who's going to finish as the team leader in goals. Like they were always trying to bring the best out in each other, but it was healthy competition with internal. It wasn't animosity because it was like, hey, we are growing as a team while we're doing these internal competitions, and it resulted on the ice. And so I'm slowly starting to see that with this current Blackhawks era where you see guys like Connor Bedard and Frank Nazar staying out late at practice and working on their craft, but not just building chemistry on the ice, building the chemistry off of the ice, hoping that it will then translate into successful seasons in the years to come.
You mentioned Nazar. Kane said that they've been working out together at times this summer. He's been impressed with what he has seen from Frank. He feels that, like we all see, Frank has that extra gear, and he's got a competitive spirit, which Patrick likes. Even if they're just doing a drill, he wants to win that drill. And Kane says he's developed some chemistry with Nazar. I take a lot into that because that tells me Nazar sees the game in an elite way, in a playmaking way that we always said not everybody can play with Patrick Kane. Patrick Kane can make other players better, but it was the 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, the Panarins, the Stromes that stood out as really having that connection. So when Nazar has that with Kane in a limited sample size, and everybody thinks Kane would be the natural fit with 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, it also tells me Nazar and Bedard could also be, at times a good combination for the Blackhawks because they probably see the game similarly that Nazar and Kane do.
Right. That 100%. And I think with you can have all the skill in the world, but if you don't have the brains to play with a guy like Connor Bedard or a Patrick Kane or a Sidney Crosby, whoever that might be, the fit isn't going to be there. And it's why I think 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Kunitz was such an amazing line mate for Sidney Crosby, because you don't think of 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Kunitz as like a guy that was going to be a perennial 40 goal scorer or whatever. It's like he just thought the game the same way as Crosby. And he's like, well, I know where Crosby wants me. I'm going to go to those places. Similar when 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 was with Chicago and him and Kane had the chemistry. It's like 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀's 5'7". Like he's a small guy, but he knows where to go and he knows where the open areas are so that Kane can feed him the puck. And that's why they had such an incredible chemistry, especially on the power play where they're teeing up one-timers, because 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 would know where to go. And so for Kane to single that out specifically to Nazar, not just is he a very skilled hockey player, but he also thinks the game at a very high level, should give Chicago fans confidence that Bedard and Nazar could potentially be a duo moving forward. If they are on separate lines or together, Nazar is going to be able to do that himself. And so I think one of the other things that Kane said that I think Chicago fans should get excited about is that Nazar has this supreme confidence about himself. Like he just skates, like he just beats to his own drum. And that is awesome to see at such a young age for Frank Nazar, because a lot of times young players get into the NHL and it takes them several years to develop that confidence and to feel like they belong in the NHL. Whereas with Nazar, it just feels like he instantly has it. And even if he goes through some stretches where he's not producing like he did when he first got called up to the NHL this year, I think he only had like 1 or 2 points in like the first 11 or 12 games. He still had the confidence within himself, and he powered through that and ended up finishing the season on a very strong note, and then that carried over into the World. So love what Kane said about Nazar, because it has to get you excited for this coming season for Frank.
That was encouraging what he said about Bedard as well. We all know the comparisons of the first overall picks, both Kane and Bedard coming in highly touted as teenagers into the league, and undersized, questioning, how would they handle things in the 200-foot game. But I loved what Bedard, what Kane said. Just like Bedard, he won the Calder Trophy in his rookie year. He said that in year 2, he felt like he left some things on the table, or a little more to be desired from his perspective in the production category in year 2. And he took a huge jump in year 3 when he had 88 points in his 3rd season. He thinks Bedard is primed to have a big jump in year 3, knowing how defenses play him, knowing the ins and outs of the league after going through it for 2 years now, the travel. We talk about staying late on the ice with Nazar. Maybe he needs to scale that back a little bit. Patrick talked about the wall you hit in your first couple of years that you're not used to. And you might have that 5 to 7 game lull where you don't have a goal or you don't have a point. And that is because you've hit a wall. Maybe in year 3, you adjust to that by taking a maintenance day or backing off from a workout that you normally do, or whatever the case may be. So I kind of, and the fact that he said things like Bedard wants to get better, and, great players, they do want to get better. They're not satisfied with where they're at or what the contract says they're going to make. They want more. They hold themselves to a different standard. And so I thought it was encouraging what Kane said about the prospects of Bedard having a jump in year 3.
For sure. And I even look at the rosters that Patrick Kane had in his year 2 and Connor's in year 2, where Kane was Kane's year 2 season, the Blackhawks ended up going to the conference final in 2008-9. So he had such an incredible infrastructure around him. Sure, most of them were obviously very young, and they were all trying to navigate their way together. But it was such a different situation with Connor Bedard last year, where he probably felt like if he was shut down offensively, the Blackhawks were going to have they were going to struggle scoring goals. And so Bedard probably felt that pressure. And as over time, whether it's year 3, obviously the roster kind of stayed the same, but I think internal growth is going to be key for Chicago this coming season. But when the Hawks are starting to be competitive and competing for playoffs and Stanley Cups, Bedard is going to have such a stronger supporting cast around him to not feel so much pressure to want to do it all. But the fact that he has the desire to, you see it in guys like Connor McDavid, Nathan MacKinnon, when their team isn't going, they take it upon themselves to strap the team on their shoulders and guide them through those challenging times. And so I think Bedard inherently has that, like, I want to lead this team and I want it so bad that sometimes he can do it himself, because there are a lot of times that he can do it himself. But as the infrastructure around him starts to grow, he's going to feel less of that pressure to feel like he has to do it all himself.
All right, I want to move on to then the conversation I had with him for about 45 minutes in the West Loop on Friday night. And I started it off with, I contacted his hockey big brother, Patrick Sharp, and I asked him, what's your favorite thing about Kane? And here's what he said. Sharpie said, my favorite thing about Kane is that he inspired an entire generation. So many of the young players in today's game grew up idolizing Kaner, and I think that's cool. We have talked about that. Because of the rebuild, we have been draft-centric over the last several years. Not talking about playoffs, not talking about the game, we're talking about the draft. And we talked about it maybe, 4 or 5 years ago, where we're watching the draft and they put up the bio of draft prospect X, and it has their vitals, where they're from, size, way they shoot, player that they idolize or model their game after or look up to, whatever their hockey hero is. And like inevitably 70% of them are Patrick Kane. And to that point, Gavin McKenna, the presumptive number 1 next year, who's 17, who was 7 when Kane won his 3rd cup, his favorite player is Patrick Kane. And so, where usually there's a shelf life for these these hockey heroes to kids. Like you move on from LeBron to Steph Curry to SGA, it changes over time. That shelf life hasn't exactly been the same for Kane. Kane over this 20-year span has been in that conversation more times than not.
Right. It's like you're waiting for the favorite players to start to graduate to McDavid and McKinnon, and it's like it's still Kane.
And some of them do, but
sure.
But there's still a group that is like, again, McKenna. Like, how do you explain? He was 7 the last time the Blackhawks did anything of prominence, and Patrick did anything in the playoffs of significance.
Right.
And yet that was 10 years ago, and his favorite player is Kane.
That's exactly the example that I was going to bring up. I was like, how does he get to a point where Kane becomes his favorite player when he was 7 when they won their 3rd Stanley Cup? And oh, by the way, he's a Canadian boy too, so you would think that he would gravitate towards Sid or towards McKinnon or McDavid, but it's still Kane. And so and that's such a perfect encapsulation, by 𝗫𝗏 saying like he inspired a new generation of fans, because it doesn't just sit in Chicago. It's like worldwide American kids too grew up idolizing him.
Right. Like we could all say that he sparked, because you're the perfect example. You were in 2013 at TD Garden as a fan, as a young Blackhawks fan, and then it sparked part of your interest in the game. And then you made it your career covering the sport. And so you've seen it from both sides, and you were in that sweet spot of being a fan and then seeing it on the other side. And I got to see it with my kids who were playing hockey in the 2010s, the 13s and 15s. And it absolutely woke a sleeping giant in the city of Chicago with youth hockey. But to see it have an impact on generations, not just one generation, several generations, and all over North America and in Europe as well. That's pretty cool. So that was kind of like, when you're in an environment like that, we you try to find some things, some stories, some nuggets that humanize the player that everybody can relate to in the room. And so along the his impact on a generation, we talked about the Heartbreak 𝗟𝗍, the 2013 hat trick against the LA Kings. And, we showed the Heartbreak 𝗟𝗍, and I asked him, I said, where did you come up with that? And he talked about seeing Jason Taylor, the now Hall of Fame defensive end from the Miami Dolphins. And one of his sack celebrations was the heartbreaks, where he would do this and boom. And it wasn't as dramatic as Patrick's was against the Kings. Patrick said he tried it one time before in a game against Vancouver in a playoff game. And then he saved it and he said it was impromptu. He said, I hadn't said, okay, if I get the hat trick, I'm doing it now. He knew he had that in his back pocket. And at some point he was waiting for the moment. I think he found the right moment. The fact he has never done that celebration again, Charlie.
Yeah.
That was 2013. And that celebration has been repeated time and time again, including Bedard in the World Juniors on the championship winning goal. He did it there. That's the kind of impact we're talking. Something that happened in 2013 that he's never done again is still being done in 2023.
Right.
And 25.
Yeah. Given the circumstances of double overtime to send the Blackhawks into the Stanley Cup for the second time since 2010, I honestly think that is the greatest celebration in NHL history. I mean, for him to go down on his knees too, and then you have Andrew Shaw coming below him and hugging him, and it was like this Titanic type celebration that they ended up recreating on the front of a boat after they won the Stanley Cup, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, Kane, I mean, one of the things I love about Patrick Kane, watching him here in Chicago, is that every time he scored a goal, you would have to keep the camera on him because you knew that there was going to be a sweet celebration coming, and that was always part of his persona, and a big reason why he's called Showtime, because not just does he dazzle on the ice and he makes these incredible moves, but he is entertainment. And a lot of that has to do with the celebrations that he's had over the course of his career, and especially in those big moments.
Okay, something I learned. You mentioned Showtime. Do you know who came up with Showtime?
I don't think I do. Was it 𝗏𝗏𝗶𝗹?
Patrick Kane's dad. Yeah. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗀 is his nickname, Patrick Kane Sr. When they were playing pool in the basement, when Patrick was growing up, before he would line up a big shot, he'd say Showtime. And it just struck a nerve with Patrick. And so Patrick adopted Showtime as his, favorite saying in a big moment. So we mentioned this Heartbreak Sully, which I totally agree with you. The other thing that came up, and again, these are like little things, but I think it goes to show you the impact he's had. So I'm watching the Stanley Cup final, and I'm watching Tkachuk work that mouth guard, and I'm like, God, he works that. I know, I've seen that. He worked that exactly the way Patrick Kane does. And so I asked him about the mouth guard situation, and I said, when did you realize that players in the NHL and youth players and players in juniors and college were mimicking you and doing the mouth guard hanging out of the mouth and working it the way you do? And he goes, yeah, early on, I knew that players were doing that. And he goes, there's several players, Matthew Tkachuk being one of them, that have said it's because of the way Patrick Kane did it. And then the funny thing is Patrick hasn't used a mouth guard in 7 or 8 seasons. Yeah. So again, they're like, he hasn't done the celebration in 12 years, this Heartbreak Sully in 12 years. People are still doing it. He hasn't worn a mouth guard in 7 or 8 years, and players are still doing it. Like, it's a weird, it's the impact he's had on so many different levels to this game that, it's pretty funny when you hear the stories behind the story.
Yeah, I think he said he went overseas during the lockout year and he didn't wear a mouth guard. I don't know if he forgot it or whatever. And he's like, oh, I guess I don't really need this. And then that's when he stopped wearing it. And it's been 12 years where he hasn't worn a mouth guard. But it's cool to see, because I think Kane too, the first time he was on the EA Sports NHL video game is him skating and the mouth guard is hanging out. So there's literally a cover video game of Kane with the mouth guard. And it's cool to see when every time you hear about Matthew Tkachuk, how he and Brady idolized Patrick Kane growing up. And then you hear Austin Matthews talking about how his favorite player growing up was Patrick Kane. And I think even recently, like going into the Four Nations tournament, maybe it was like a little bit before that, but he was like, who do you think should be the Team USA captain? And he's like, Kane. Like he's Mr. America. And so at the time, like Kane was obviously going through his hip stuff. And so it wasn't even a guarantee that he was going to be on Team USA's roster. And obviously he wasn't. But even the uncertainty around Kane, like those guys were like, that's Mr. America. Like that's our guy. He should be. And so it's just even this current generation where you think of guys like Austin Matthews, where Matthews is going to start being the name along with McDavid and McKinnon, where guys are like, oh, who's your favorite player? Or people that get drafted are going to be like, oh, who's your favorite player growing up? They're going to say Austin Matthews. It's like Matthews is still idolizing Kane in that way. And so I think that's also what made those dueling celebrations years ago with the ear to the hand was so cool, because they both had like a mutual respect for each other.
All right, so I think that's going to put some closure on our Patrick Kane conversation. You mentioned the Olympics. He's stoked. He's invited to the Team USA orientation in a couple of weeks, and he's using it as motivation. He is trying to make that team. So we'll see how that plays out. But, man, that would be pretty crazy at age 37 to see Patrick Kane leading Team USA into Italy for the Olympics.
I do miss watching him on the big stage, and so I'm very much rooting for him to make Team USA's roster, if nothing else, to just be like a power play specialist. Not that he would be relegated to that role, but there is still a lot of value to Kane. I mean, you saw how successful Detroit's power play was, and it ran through Patrick Kane, and so there's still a lot of value there. And hopefully he has a really strong start to the season and potentially forces his way onto Team USA's roster.
All right. The NFL has endless lists as they get ready for their season. Every poll, everything you could possibly think of. We are going to steal a page from them. We're going to give you the way too early starting lineup for your Chicago Blackhawks when they open the season in October against the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. You want to start things off, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Should we go line by line kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, exactly. I think we'll go forwards, defensemen, then goalies. We'll maybe go line by line. Although maybe if you want, we could do it where we go top six, then bottom six.
Yeah, I think that would probably work best.
All right, perfect. So I'll kick things off because I feel like there could be a lot of different combinations, and so I'm sure we can go back and forth. So let's go with the first line first. I think the lock for me for opening night should be Connor Bedard and 𝗬𝗏 𝗟𝗏. Like, they should be a duo when the Blackhawks take on the Florida Panthers. And the question is, who's going to be that third guy? Is it going to be Ryan Donato? Is it going to be 𝗬𝗏 who finished the year on that line? Is it going to be Andre Burakovsky, who the Blackhawks finished with, or who the Blackhawks acquired in the summer and expect to play a top six role? I'm going to go a little bit off the board, and I'm going to say Tyler Bertuzzi in that role. And I'm going to say that because of his history with Jeff Blashill and the success that he had with Detroit and even in the minors. The Hawks rolled with that trio pretty much all of training camp last year, and then they got away from it on opening night. Obviously, Tyler Bertuzzi is not the fleetest of foot, so it's not an ideal fit. But at the same time, Ryan Donato played with Connor Bedard last year, and they were very successful together. So that's going to be my trio there. And then the second line will be Andre Burakovsky, Frank Nazar, and Ryan Donato. I could probably be convinced if you flip-flop Donato and Bertuzzi, because Bertuzzi finished last season on a line with Frank Nazar, and they did so pretty successfully. But that's kind of my early thinking of the top six.
All right. I'll just pick up with Tyler. I don't have Tyler in my top six as we start the season. And part of that is the unevenness of his season. He is traditionally known to start slow. That's why we saw him in training camp and in practices leading up to the season opener last year, and then we didn't see him. I don't think he was ready to go at the bell. I hope that Blashill and having that past history with Bertuzzi and maybe reaching out to him this summer, hey, bud, let's be ready to roll. You're getting an opportunity. Yeah. You're getting an opportunity, or I'm giving you an opportunity in a top six role, or with a guy like Bedard or whatever. But, I haven't seen enough of that from Bertuzzi. So right now I have him on my third line. I'm going with Burakovsky, who they picked up this offseason. And I've got Burakovsky, Bedard, and I am like you. I think 𝗬𝗏 and Bedard should be the duo that you kind of work around early on. I'm not saying we're not going to see Bedard and Nazar together at times. I think that you should. But I think by and large, you want to divide and conquer with those two. We'll see if Nazar eventually moves to wing or even Bedard does when Frondell comes into the mix. But I've got Burakovsky, Bedard, 𝗬𝗏 as my top line. I got Mikheyev, Nazar, and Donato as my second line. And again, Donato and Burakovsky have history playing together in Seattle. You could make a case that he could be on the same line as 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀. My third line is Foligno, Dickinson, and the aforementioned Bertuzzi. And, my odd man out, as I look at the fourth line, this is a big year for Colton Dach. I've got Colton Dach, Lafferty, and Slaggert together. Where is Lukas Reichel? This is a big camp for him, a big season. I feel like we've said that now for a year, but I do think this is an opportunity. He could move up. If he has a really strong camp, he could get moved possibly if the right deal is in place, a change of scenery type of deal. And I didn't include Oliver Moore and Ryan Green. If one of those two, probably more Green, if has a huge camp and makes the decision impossible for the coaches to send him to Rockford, I could see one of those players possibly breaking camp in the starting lineup. And then, who's the odd man out? Is Lafferty sitting, whatnot?
Yeah, we have almost an identical bottom six, where my third line is Foligno, Dickinson, and then I have 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗃 as the third line. And that is no disrespect to 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗃, because he finished last year on the top six, and rightfully so. Like, he was unbelievable down the stretch and in the second half of the season. I think my thinking is Chicago probably wants to play specific roles going into next year. And I think ideally Mikheyev is your perfect third line checking center, can play penalty kill, can jump into maybe the second power play unit if needed. But that would be the best fit for 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗃. And I love him with Jason Dickinson, because it feels like with the two of them together, they can definitely check with some of the best of the opposing NHL players. With Nick Foligno has that built-in chemistry with Dickinson, so I just think the three of them will be able to fit together. And then the fourth line, I have the exact same: Colton Dach, Sam Lafferty, Landon Slaggert, with Lukas Reichel on the outside looking in. And it's probably going to be a conversation going into training camp whether or not Reichel is even going to be on the opening night roster, as far as, is there going to be a potential change of scenery type move? Because typically August is really quiet. Like, you don't really see movement around the NHL until we get closer to training camps and guys are starting to single themselves out on different teams, or maybe other players are disappointing in camp and they need to bring someone else in to fill a different role. And so that might be the case with Chicago, where if they feel like they have a good solid 12 and Reichel is on the outside looking in, like, you can only do so much where you're putting him in the lineup and trying to showcase him. Like, how many years, are you going to give a spot to a player when he's had an opportunity to showcase himself and he hasn't? So that one's going to be an interesting to follow. And then, yeah, you mentioned with Oliver Moore and Ryan Green, I would like to see both of them start in the minors and kind of not think twice about it, because there is going to be a temptation where they got that taste at the NHL level last year and maybe they should just pick up where they left off. But I think it would be better to let them start the year in Rockford and kind of be on a Frank Nazar type path, where it's like, just go down there, play top 6 minutes, show us when you're ready to be called up, so that way when you do get called up, you don't see Rockford again. Versus if they start the year in the NHL and they're playing some sheltered minutes and then they sort of hit a wall, then they have to go to Rockford and refine their game. Then it's kind of like a story. And then it's like, well, when do you call them back up to see? And so I think I would like to see both of them start the year in Rockford. I think Ryan Green is probably ahead of Oliver Moore as far as NHL readiness, but I wouldn't want the Hawks to start Ryan Green in the NHL if he's just going to be like the fourth line center. Like, I think you would want him to ideally be a top 9 guy. So if you have Bedard, Nazar, Dickinson as your top 3 centers, I would stick with that, unless you feel like you need to push Nazar to the wing, Dickinson moves up, and then you can call up Ryan Green and slot him into a middle 6 role. That's the only reason that's the only way I would see a path towards Ryan Green starting in the NHL. But if I'm running Chicago, I would let Moore and Green start the year in Rockford and kind of let that be sort of like a predetermined plan, and not let the camp kind of cloud the overall long term of their development.
Kind of do what they did with Nazar last year, right?
Right.
And Nazar got off to that great start, was among the AHL leaders, was going to represent Rockford at the All-Star break, got the call up. And while we talked about earlier, struggled a little bit early on, found his footing and seemingly got better and better and better as the season went on. And that carried into the Worlds. And we look to see, big things now in his second full season in the National Hockey League, or first full season as it'll turn out to be. I think things are a little clearer on the back end as far as roles and who is looking to be with what pairing. And for me, it starts with Alex Vlasic and Sam Rinzel.
Yeah, those two were awesome together in the brief time that they did get last year in the 9 games that Rinzel was in the NHL. And man, that is going to be an exciting pairing to watch for a full 82-game season, where you have Vlasic, who can go back to psychologically feeling like he can be more of a shutdown type guy, versus last year he was running power plays or whatever because they didn't have the power play quarterbacks, but now they do with Sam Rinzel and Artem Levshunov. And so if you have Vlasic as maybe one of your top even strength minutes guy, and then more so primarily on the penalty kill as well, he can kind of pass off the offensive duties to a guy like Sam Rinzel where he can be more aggressive. I think that's going to be super exciting to watch. Second pairing, I think Wyatt Kaiser and Artem Levshunov would be my two. I know they played a majority of last season together in the time that they did. I realize Kaiser, as of this recording, is still without a contract, but the Hawks are promoting him on their social channels, so it doesn't seem like there's going to be much concern about getting that done. So I expect him to be part of the roster. The real question comes to me is who's going to be that sixth guy, because you got Connor Murphy on the right side. Is two names pop up into my head. Is it going to be Ethan Del Mastro, where you kind of get that stable presence back there with a guy like Connor Murphy, or is this the year that Kevin Korchinski plays himself into a potential full-time role with the Blackhawks? Or is he going to start the year in Rockford, pick up where he left off with Levshunov in the NHL, so he can be the overall number one guy, and then as he finds his game or carries over his game from last year, then you call him up and feel like he's ready to be a full-time player? That's the biggest storyline to me about whether Kevin Korchinski is ready to be full-time NHL player out of the gates. And then my seventh defenseman is going to be 𝗠cie 𝗵𝗶𝗹.
Okay, I've got Del Mastro and Murphy together, and I can see nights where their minutes are bigger than Kaiser and Levshunov just because of matchups. I am with you. It's going to be very interesting to see how things fall for Korchinski. I don't hate the idea of him going to the AHL again and playing top minutes in all situations and honing his craft versus being in a 6th or 7th D-man role with the big club. And then I look at Allen and 𝗵𝗵𝗹 as kind of fighting for that last spot. And then as the season winds on, I think depending on how things look and how the prospects show themselves, how Korchinski looks, I think Connor Murphy's the longest tenured Blackhawk. He's the second longest tenured Chicago sports athlete behind Ian Happ in this city. And he's probably going to be mentioned in trade rumors approaching the deadline. And it's going to be interesting to see, there's not a lot of players on this roster that have the role of sticking up for other players. And we know Foligno does that, but there aren't many others. Murphy is one of them. And so there's a lot to take into account that Connor brings to the table. But when you look at the big picture and you look at the prospects that they have in their defenseman pool and you look at spots, it is likely that, they might have to move Murphy to give one of those players an opportunity.
For sure. And it's got to be nice, though, going into the season when you see your 3 right-handed shot defensemen are Rinzel, Levshunov, and then Connor Murphy there at number 3 to kind of stabilize things and prop the other 2 up. But yeah, I imagine as we get closer to the trade deadline and Connor Murphy is healthy and he's performing well, he could definitely be a piece that's potentially moved down the road. And then with Kevin Korchinski, last thing I'll say about him is I'm not sure I would even want him to start the year on the third pairing with Murphy, because then he's only getting like 13, 14 minutes a night. And it's almost like stunting his growth, because he's probably not going to get any power play time, because that's going to go to +𝗏𝗏 and 𝗀𝗏. And so I would much prefer that if Korchinski is kind of a bubble player, I'd rather he just start the year in Rockford, go play the 20+ minutes a night, be the all-around guy, number one power play guy, gain that confidence. And then if there's an injury or something to the Blackhawks roster and they need a guy to step into a top 4 role, Korchinski could be ready to do that.
And in net for the Blackhawks, the former Florida Panther taking on his old team on the night that they raised the banner to the rafters in Sunrise, Spencer Knight.
Yeah, Spencer Knight, and obviously Arvid Soderblom will be backing up. The real question in that is what's going to happen with 𝗵𝗏𝗏, because he obviously went all of last year without playing. I'm not sure how things have progressed in the summer. You hope that he's going to be available at training camp and slowly will ramp things up. This is what I'll say about that situation. I don't know if Chicago should be quick to trade him before opening night, because I think they're going to have some sort of grace period where, I don't know, like, will 𝗏𝗏𝗏 be able to get like a conditioning stint in Rockford, because he's had such, he's gone a year and a half without playing. And you see it all the time. There was that situation a few years ago where the Hawks were dealing with so many injuries to like Peter Mrazek and Alex Stalock. And it was like at one point, Dylan Wells was the starting goalie for Chicago because they just ran into injuries. And they're like, we're calling up our 5th string guy. And so I think you want time is on your side. And so if training camp is developing, you can kind of slow play 𝗏𝗏𝗏's return to the NHL. And so you never know what's going to happen, but there could be an injury like the second week of the season, and the Hawks are like, great, we need a number 2 goalie right now. And so I don't know. I would be surprised if that was a situation that got dealt with early on in training camp. I think that's going to be something where 𝗏𝗏𝗏 will be on the roster with Chicago, and then into the season is when they might try to figure out, okay, what do we do with these 3?
All right, that's our recap on 8/8 day last week and Patrick's appearance on the podcast, as well as our way too early starting lineup for opening night for the Blackhawks and Panthers. Anything else you got to get off your mind?
We are in the very dog days of the offseason. So I'm going to be taking the next couple weeks off. So after Labor Day, we'll be back in full swings in full swing. We got the Tom Curver showcase that rolls around in September, and then once that hits, we'll be ready to go. But yeah, it's been a long summer, Pat.
It has. It's been a long summer the last several. That's what happens when you don't play deep into the summer. That's why back in the day they used to say, who's the best golfer on the Blackhawks, and they'd say there aren't any, because they're usually concluding a parade in late June, and they're having their cup days in July, and they're not on a golf course. Unfortunately, in the last several years, they've been playing too much golf, playing in April.
That's right.
So that is going to do it for this edition of the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast, brought to you by Toyota. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will catch you next time.